Welcome, I'm Eric Swartz, WA6HHQ with Elecraft. I'm here to talk today about our new K4 HF transceiver. It's a direct sampling high performance SDR, covers 160 through 6 meters. It's got 2 receivers, so you can basically listen to 2 different bands at once and also display those in a dual pan adapter on the screen. And also we have no need for crystal filters in our K4 and K4D, since all that work's being done by the high performance digital signal processor in the radio. It has hi-fi audio that basically is an improvement even on our K3, which was excellent. In the K4, we've gone one step further with lower intermodulation distortion in the audio spectrum. And basically what that buys you is lower fatigue during contests or long operating sessions chasing DX. But also, if you're listening to pileups, say, or at the end of a DXpedition, listening to 100 people call you at once, the ability to pull out individual signals out of that mush of all the signals calling you at once in the pileup is much easier on the K4. And we've been quite pleased with the reports back from people who've been using our radios in terms of contest use and pileup use, that they've been very happy with the sound on the radio. Also, we have a large high-res color touchscreen on the radio, and that allows you to actually have additional features that you wouldn't necessarily be able to fit into all the physical buttons on the radio. But we don't give up all the physical buttons on the radio also. So you've got the touchscreen here in the middle, but also we've got physical buttons for the most commonly used functions on the radio, which I'll walk you through in a little bit. Basically, the goal here was to give you the same ease of use that we had on our earlier radios like the K3, and also additional functions that we can do on screen that you couldn't do without having a much larger radio or even much more complex radio to use. So I'd like to walk you through the front panel just a little bit, give you a feel for what the controls are and what's available on the front of the radio. And then we'll go through the back panel on the radio and also some additional features on the radio too. Over here on the left side of the radio, of course, big power button at the top, but most of the functions here and the very top section of these are related to mostly transmitter setup and also antenna selection. So you can put the radio in the tune or a low power tune. You can do a transmit, just like a push the mic button down button key, and also put it in the test mode where it puts the whole radio into a mode where it acts like it's transmitting but is not. So you can use that to test out or set up different things to make sure you got everything hooked up right. Automatic antenna tune here, and then Vox or QSK break-in selection with this button for your Morse code operation and voice. And then you can select remote antennas here, like I can come here. Actually, this is antenna 1, antenna 2, antenna 3. You actually will see that on the screen here as I switch it. I'll go through it again. 1, 2, 3. And you can also select receive antennas. You can handle 5 different receive antennas per receiver. One neat thing also, you've got a series of knobs here that are also tap. You can use them to change mode. And what they do is shown on the screen right next to them. So the top transmitter knob, it's labeled, handles in Morse code mode, CW mode. It handles speed for words per minute on the built-in keyer. And also, of course, if you tap it, or you can also tap the screen to go between the 2 functions, you can control power here. Correspondingly, the next one's the filter. I've got bandwidth and shift, or if I tap it again, it goes high cut, low cut. So you can do either mode of operation for setting up your filters. And then down here, it says RF or squelch, but basically it's the main and sub RF gain that you can adjust. Then coming across the radio, I'll come back to the main screen in a second here. The other function buttons, we want to make sure the physical buttons here really mimic what we do on any radio. So the top row is either quick memory recalls or CW memories or voice, digital voice recorder playback memories. You can play and record those here, just like we do on a K3. And then all the usual receiver functions: preamplifier, attenuator, noise blanker on and off, noise reduction, notch filter, both auto notch and manual. And this button, filter, FIL, right here, lets you pick memorized filter bandwidths and shifts. So it remembers those. So if you know what you'd like to do most of the time, you can just push this to rotate through them, or you can adjust the bandwidth control linearly, so you can pick which way you want to go. Lastly, on the bottom row here is your AB selection for A and B VFO. You can actually swap them, which I just did there, and then goes back. The pan adapters follow and everything, so you can switch to your active transmit VFO. By the way, I can go into split. This little icon here shows you whether you're in split mode. And if I push and hold the AB, it says, oh, I'm transmitting on this one and listening on this one now, for instance. And then I push it back to go back. But anyway, you've got AB, reverse, quick reverse, and also A to B and B to A copy. Spot for CW side tone spot. And also auto tracking for auto spot on CW. And then mode rotates, brings up the mode screen where you can pick your sideband, lower sideband, tap again for upper sideband, data modes, AFSK, and so on, all different modes. But if you don't want to go over here and hit that mode button, if you just tap the mode for the receiver you're working on, you can change the mode there too. And if you wait a little bit, it'll go away, or you can hit return to go out right away. So the nice thing is you have physical buttons for all the common stuff you're storing there. Around the VFO, we've got VFO related buttons here, frequency entry, you hit frequency and then the enter button here, and then the little red nomenclature gives you the numbers. And that'll jump to that frequency. The rate button tunes the rate that you're tuning at. If you hold it, it gives you 100 kilohertz steps, so quick tuning, or down to 1 hertz tuning. They are very fine tuning. Turns on and off the subreceiver down here in the lower left, and you can lock VFOs. And now if OA doesn't move at all, say you're in a pile up and you want to be split frequency and not change your transmit frequency or vice versa, you can do that for VFO A and B. And lastly, RIT and XIT control here. The knobs, VFO A, VFO B, and this is your RIT, XIT control here, which you can also clear, turn back off. Okay, what I'd like to talk about next actually on the radio is a little more of a deep dive into our pan adapter display on how we can display both, of course, as I've got set up here right now with 2 pan adapters, both for VFO A on the left and VFO B on the right. And you can see on the external monitor where I'm actually mirroring the whole screen right now, showing exactly the same thing. So you can see the spectral data for VFO A from 40 meters and also VFO B from 14 megahertz 20 meter band. One neat thing is that we actually have fully independent control of what goes on each screen. Right now I've chosen to actually mirror the complete full screen of the K4 so that buttons and all, you can see everything on the screen there. As a matter of fact, as I'm touching, for instance, shift and width, you can see it changing on the external screen exactly as I'm touching it on the internal screen there on the left-hand side of the screen. But what's nice is I can independently set these screens up to do different things. In the simplest case here, I can mirror, I can go between showing VFO A and B like I'm doing on the pan adapter right now, or just VFO A, just VFO B. So if I bring up display here, if I want to, I can change the display. Now what I've done is I've gone to a single pan adapter display that's just zoomed in on the 7 megahertz band that shows you much more detail, of course, if you can spread it out like that, in both the waterfall and the display. But I can also, of course, switch over. Now I'm showing VFO B. Then I'm back to a split display there. But what's really cool, besides just mirroring the whole screen, I also can set up the external screen to show just the pan adapter and waterfall, either split or single band. So this takes a second for it to switch between mirror mode here, but we'll get that going here, and it'll be up in about 5-10 seconds. It's not something you usually do while you're actively using this radio. You're going to set it up the way you want usually and leave it. But now that you see, is now I've got split display and actually showing them both that way at the moment, independent without all the extra buttons. So we can actually make that single band, go there, and there we go. So now I've changed the external display to just show the 40 meter band. But what's neat is I'm still showing split on internal here. So A and B. So we got both going on at once, which is sort of neat. You can actually independently adjust that and decide what you want to see on each display. And that's something you don't see in a lot of radios. A lot of times they'll just mirror the main screen off to the external screen. Okay, back to the core features on the K4. Really, the K4 is based on a new generation analog devices, Shark family digital signal processor. This is their ADSP2149 running at 450 megahertz. We did use an earlier version of that in our earlier radios, but this one is so much faster, it's allowed us to do a whole bunch more inside the radio. We had great latency on the K3 in terms of low delay throughout the receive channel, but we actually have now sped that up quite a bit so that it's even better on the K4. That gives you, minimal delay on transmit to receive, but on top of that, it also gives you our signature very fast QSK break-in CW Morse code operation. It's even faster than the K3, so I think you're going to like that quite a bit too. On top of that, the processor allowed us to actually go one step beyond what we did in the K3 for noise reduction. The K3 used what they call an LMS algorithm, and those of you that are familiar with this in our radio and others, it's probably been the most commonly used algorithm, is it builds a dynamic filter around the signal you're listening to and automatically narrows it to get rid of noise. And so you sort of get a sound like this when you're listening to it. I'm sure those of you that have used that recognize that. Yes, it gets the noise background down, but it does cause that artifact of sound coming out of a barrel basically while you're listening to it. What we've been able to do is take advantage of some new technology that's come along, certainly in the years since the K3 came out and the K3S, to where we now use what's called a modified spectral subtraction algorithm, where we actually can remove the noise versus recognizing voice or Morse code or other data mode signals, in particular voice Morse code, and basically remove those spectrally and do that in real time with this high-speed processor. And it has a neat feature in it where it actually, there are some other spectral subtraction algorithms out there. They'll actually knock down individual frequencies that are not part of your voice that you're listening to. But it tends, when it does that, sound almost like a calliope, a little bit of noise in the background, actually with those discrete channels being turned on and off. We've been able to eliminate that with the algorithm we're using on this, so it's minimized. You don't hear it much at all. It's actually quite pleasant to listen to. So that's something we could do with the higher speed digital signal processor. On top of that, it's doing all the filtering and all the noise blanking, everything else in real time in the radio. So really, it's quite a neat part to work with. It's given us quite a bit of flexibility on the K4. On top of that, by the way, in the K4, of course, we're locked to a very tight frequency reference in the radio with a low phase noise oscillator. But that's also got a 10 megahertz reference that you can lock to an external GPS to get even higher accuracy on your radio. And that's out the back. The radio is standard with radio. Next, I'd like to talk about the back panel on the K4. I won't go through it in excruciating detail. I want to keep you awake for the rest of the presentation today. But I want to give you a feel for what you've got for I/O on the radio, antenna connections, things like that, just so you can see what you've got. So in the picture we've got up here, you can see we've got multiple antenna connections on the left side with SO239s. There's 3 of them for antenna 1, 2, and 3 that basically give you full transmit receive capability for the radio, the transceiver. There's a 4th connector there. It says antenna 4, and right now we actually relabeled it transverter or VHF, UHF. I forget the label that's on it. For an optional transverter we're putting in the future. So really for the HF operation, you've got 3 outputs that can be used for, and one could be listening on the second receiver, and the other one could be used for transceive for the first receiver and the transmitter if you wanted, or switch between them for different antennas, things like that. Of course, power in the lower left-hand corner with the Anderson power pole connectors. Also, we've got below the fans, you've got a series of B and C connectors. This gives you everything from, we do have one that's labeled TX sample in. That's for a future option where we can actually get real-time feedback for pre-distortion on the radio, though we've not implemented that yet. But the hardware is in place for that. So down the road, I think we'll have that coming out. We've got several antenna inputs on here. You'll see on here both RX antenna in the middle, RX antenna in-out, where you could actually put your own filters and things like that in the receive path, or use that as a dedicated receive antenna. That's all selectable from the front panel with a button, which receiver gets which antenna. If you look at the transverter, the inputs there and output, that can also be used as an additional, if you're not using external transverters, an additional antenna input, so a second receive antenna input, in addition to the 3 that you've got coming in through the antenna tuner. And I'll talk about how those are selected in a few minutes too. Over on the right side, very similar to the K3, we've got a lot of all the legacy analog, line in, line out, microphone, headphone connectors. So you'll be able to basically hook up exactly the same way you did if you don't want to use some of the more advanced features on the radio. We've also got on the lower row, you've got the Morse Code Key and paddle input, independent, and also PTT in and key out to an external amplifier. So you can hook a foot switch directly up to us in the back if you want, just like you can hook your headset up like a Heil headset or one of the other ones that use the smaller 1/8" connectors in the back too if you want, instead of going in through the front connectors. We've also got Ethernet on the top, so the radio's got full digital control over Ethernet also, and also USB. There's a USB square B connector in the back in addition to a couple of USB A's. The A's are peripheral, the little vertical USB slots are for like our K-Pod knob that we use to control the VFO externally. Also, you can hook up keyboards, mouse to click and tune on the radio, etc. to those. The PC connection through the USB-B gives you remote control of the radio from a PC computer for logging and things like that, remote control, but also the ability to have a sound card. You have a sound card inside the radio. Use that sound card for remote data modes instead of the sound card in your PC. So it's a single cable hookup for control and sound in and out of the radio on that too. What's really neat, by the way, is we also have on the right, you'll see a Rs232 connection. You can control us via the Rs232 connection, or maybe hook that up to a step-IR antenna or another amplifier that needs serial control. Or you can be talking to us over the PC connection to control it, or you can be talking to us over Ethernet. So it's flexible either way, which is very nice. Got some additional features on the K4 we're going to cover now. One of the key features, of course, in any radio is the automatic antenna tuning unit. And the ATU in the K4 is a direct descendant of the ATUs we've used, which are really quite famous in terms of their matching ability in all of our radios, from the K2 to the K3, all of our KX line radios. They basically all use a switched L network tuner algorithm, automatically switched with relays, and that basically gives you the most efficient match. In our case, on especially from 80 through 10, about a 10-to-1 match range, and then up on 160, and then over on 6 meters, we guarantee at least a 5-to-1. You'll do better in some cases there. But those basically are all memorized inside the microprocessor that controls the automatic antenna tuner, just like it is again on the K3 and our other radios, and pretty much can match almost anything out there. And what's neat is it memorizes the match by frequency and band, and by what frequency within the band, and also on what antenna you're on. So once you've taught it your antennas, whenever you go back to a frequency on a specific antenna, it recalls that setting and actually just with a click automatically is tuned to it. You forget you even got it in line. So it's a very smart tuner. Additionally, above and beyond what we did on our other radios, we've added a relay-based antenna switching matrix to it that basically allows you, with either the two receivers in the radio, if you have a K4D, or the primary, it can be still two receivers, but in the same band with the K4A, but you can select up to 5 antenna selections, the 3 SO239s on the back of the radio, and the 2 additional BNC connectors with receiver 1 and antenna and receiver 2 to go to either of the 2 receivers. So you've got quite a flexibility, again, remembered per band in the radio. So as you switch bands, it'll switch what each receiver's on. And you can actually remember the last antenna you were using for that band. So that's very powerful in terms of having that capability on top of the automatic antenna tuning capability on that card. And that's the Cat4 antenna tuner. Before the K4 came out, we came out with our KPA 1500 watt amplifier. And people looked at that and they looked at the size of it, nice compact package for both the amplifier RF deck and the matching power supply. And they wanted to know why we picked that size. We really couldn't tell them at the time, but we already were planning to had the K4 in process, and we were actually matching the size to exactly the same as the K4. One other thing I wanted to emphasize on the K4 and KPA 1500 when they're tied together, and this is true also when you're using the K4 with our KPA 500 amplifier, is they fully integrate just like a high power transceiver. So the K4 is a basic 100 watt radio. If you add the KPA 1500 to it, they're talking real time between the two, to where you feel like you're operating a 1500 watt radio, and the amplifier just follows you around. So the K4 integrates nicely with the amp, so it's really hands off. You don't have to pay attention to what's going on in real time and adjust things yourself manually. Okay, one thing I'd like to talk about right now is also the modularity and upgradability of the K4. We've actually got 3 different versions of the K4 radio. They look identical on the front here. I mean, unless you looked at the actual little display that says what type of radio it is, you couldn't tell. We basically have a K4, K4D, and the K4 HD. K4 basically is a single analog to digital converter that direct samples at 133 megahertz, coming in, or 122.8, excuse me, coming in off the, after bandpass filtering off the antenna. Digitizes it, and then it goes, of course, down to our digital signal processor for final processing, and you hear that original audio coming out the back. So you got basically the ability to have one antenna feeding that analog to digital converter. You can select which antenna that is, I mentioned before, from 5 sources. And you have 2 receivers. It can actually look anywhere within the full RF spectrum that we can sample, and you could be listening on basically one point in the band on the Morse code portion of the band, and have another part of the band real time listening to the sideband part of the band, or maybe listening to 2 different frequencies on the segment of the band that you're in. All that comes even with the K4. So you always have a sub-receiver, the ability to listen. If you're talking to a DX station and they're operating split transmit receive, you can listen to both sides if you want, even in a K4. But what if you want to have diversity reception, where you're listening with 2 different antennas to 2 different receivers, or 2 VFOs on different antennas? That requires a second analog to digital converter. And we give you the capability of adding another card to the radio, actually a couple of cards, but another analog to digital converter card, and also another bandpass filter card for the front end. And that gives you the capability in the K4D now. Again, it operates exactly the same. You've got 2 receivers, but they can be on independent bands on different antennas, which is very handy. So you can basically have that flexibility added going from a K4 to a K4D, and you don't have to buy the K4D right away. You could start with a K4 and go there, so you can upgrade to it. We have, for extreme cases, de-expeditions in some cases, or if you have transmitters in very close proximity to each other and you need a little more blocking dynamic range, about another 10 dB, you can go to the K4 HD version, which also lets you switch in another card set you plug in that gets you to that additional blocking dynamic range. And that basically has an additional superhet front end that you can switch in and out. So you actually have a whole range of functionality on it. We're sort of finding the sweet spot with most customers that we see buying it with the K4D, which has that second analog to digital converter. We're getting fantastic blocking dynamic range even on our current K4, K4D stuff. You're up getting close to 130 dB of blocking dynamic range. So in most cases, for instance, I was on FT8 recently operating on field day. And at that point, I didn't know I had two new neighbors that were operating that very close to me, probably within a quarter-mile line of sight. Literally, I'm on a small hill looking over where they are on the coast of California here. And I saw the strong signals in the band, but I was able to work other people nearby. It wasn't overloading the radio or anything. So it did very well, so we're very happy with that. But you can start with the K4. You still got the sub receiver, so you can listen to split stations, and then switch to the K4D when you want to and upgrade and so on. So that's the modularity of the radio and the upgradability of it. One thing we also did is that you look at the direct sampling radio. What's the most important technical component in that radio? Well, there's really two: the digital signal processor and the analog to digital converters. If they have a new chip out for the analog digital converter, we can come out with new digital down converters for even more performance and give you a midlife boost, kicker on the product later on. So the goal there is to give you both upgradability and modularity, so you can pick which version of the radio you want as you go forward. Beyond that, I mentioned earlier when I was talking about I/O on the radio, we have plans for, we have a slot in the radio for a future transverter internal to it that basically will give you VHF or VHF UHF. I can't give you the exact bands yet that it's going to be on it, but all the paths are there to support that. So that'll be another option in the radio too. So in closing, I'd like to cover the last key feature of the radio and just sort of wrap up everything for you in terms of what we've talked about today. The picture we've got here is one that they took of me in our demo room right before Dayton last year. And we were getting ready to announce the K4. And just saying, here, there's Eric in our demo room with some of our latest products. Come visit us at our booth at Dayton. And of course, there's the K4 sitting up above me and the side there. But I'm also holding a tablet in my hand. And if you look closely at the tablet, you'll see exactly the same front panel display that I had on the K4. I was actually controlling over Wi-Fi the K4 real-time remote control, but we expect to have an API, advanced programming interface out there for other people to develop software also. And so hopefully you'll see some tablet and PC-based applications that will allow you remote control and get full pan adapter data and everything, sound and everything back from the K4, because the K4 supports that, streaming out the Ethernet connection in the back. One thing we did do also, and we've been demonstrating whenever we go to the shows, is you can take one K4 and control it from another and get the full pan adapter data. And you can't even tell which radio is the one connected to the antenna and which one's talking over the internet. We had two of those at Dayton, actually, and people would fight over what frequency they're tuning the radio to, not realizing there was another person controlling it next to them. What we really plan to do, though, is rather than have to have you use another full K4 as the remote control terminal, you'll actually be able to get a K4-0 for zero power output. That's a shortened panel, but it has exactly the same front panel as the K4, just like we did in the K3 with the K30. And you get real-time pan adapter data, real-time control. Of course, you can hook up your logging programs remotely, everything else. So this was more of a teaser, that picture I put out, but we wanted to point out the remote control stuff there too. So really, in conclusion, K4 is a high-performance, direct sampling, software-defined radio covering all the HF bands from basically 160 through 6 meters, and of course add-ons for VHF, UHF when we come out with those later. Very flexible in terms of both upgradability, modular approach, and also very controllable in terms of remote control with a lot of I/O. Very good for data modes like FT8, where you can plug right in off one cable and basically use our internal sound card and you're up and running. And basically it's a fun radio to operate, easy to operate because it has both the traditional controls and buttons on it like you had on the K3, and then the additional stuff we can add on the touch screen. Thank you very much. Appreciate you listening to me today.